Okay, so good afternoon. Many thanks for joining us, everyone. So I'm really delighted to introduce Andrew Booland and Rory Buchanan from St Joseph's School in Aberdeen City. So this afternoon we've got you for an hour to look at primary practitioner examples of blended learning that have been used in St Joseph's to improve pupil engagement and motivation. So without any further ado, I am going to hand over to Andrew and Rory. If you want to ask any questions, and hopefully you have lots of questions, please pop them into the chat and the chat will be monitored. And we'll pause every now and again just to see if there are any questions. And when we are paused, feel free to put your microphone on and ask any questions. So thank you very much and hand over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much. My name's Andrew Booland. I'm a primary 7 teacher in St Joseph's School, as Susan was saying. And my colleague also, Rory Buchanan, is the other primary 7 teacher in the school. Now, today, looking at the things that we're going to be looking at, these are the areas that we're going to have a quick look at with you. Now, these are not silver bullets or definite hard and fast things that that will necessarily mean that it is automatically successful, but these are things that we have used and we feel are going to be very useful. So we're going to be looking a little bit at the impact on learners, how we can create a stimulating environment, the technology we've used without being too over technical, and giving you a number of apps that you can take away at the end of the session. Some you may know, some you may not, and kind of the pedagogy behind what we have been doing. So when we were thinking about blended learning and flipped learning, we thought about our experience during the lockdown period, which was a very steep, as I imagine for everybody, learning curve. And when we came back into school in August, we thought about how we could motivate and engage our students, because as you will know yourselves, being experts, part of the use of technology in the classroom and getting our learners to be where they should be, it really is based on motivation and engagement. And technology is great, and it's been proved to be a super tool for engaging students and learners, but it needs to have more than that. So we were thinking about motivation and engagement, making the children curious. Curiosity, as Sir Ken Robinson says, is the engine of achievement. So making them really curious and wanting to learn, making sure that we are doing as much professional work and CPD and keeping ourselves as up to date as possible, because I really believe, and my colleague does as well, no school is better than the teachers that it has, and teachers having to work very hard and being very creative in the ideas that they're doing. So that's another thing that's important. Teaching is creative. Of course, each year we use different things we use some materials from the previous year if we're in the same year group, or we adapt things, but it's a creative thing. It's a creative profession. And so that's another thing that's really important. And obviously, due to the lockdown, and as one of the things that's very important in all of the local authorities where we work, that idea of deep learning, it being profound learning, not just scratching the surface when it comes to learning. And that makes me think also a little bit of how I teach and how I should be teaching, and what Sir Ken Robinson said in one of his talks about the kind of active or passive part of verbs, and thinking about task and achievement. Andrew's dieting, is he losing any weight? Not really. So I'm not really achieving what I'm setting out to do. And I think about that a lot of the time with teaching. Andrew's teaching in P7, or he's in room 7, but is any learning taking place? So I think for me as a teacher, it's really important not just to go through the motions, but to really make sure that I'm driving and taking my learners forwards. And I'm going to pass you now to my colleague, Rory Buchanan, who's going to talk to you about motivation and impact on learners.
Hello, I hope you can all see me and hear me, and you're still awake on a Thursday afternoon. I'm not going to bother introducing myself too much because we're already in it. Now, in regards to motivation, it we certainly found that during the lockdown Aberdeen had, and I'm sure most of you have gone through at some point as well, keeping the motivation when you weren't in class was particularly difficult. And coming back into physical classrooms, we really wanted to make sure that it was not just learning because we have to, but they really were engaged. So we experimented with a few things when we were in the lockdown, which really did show an improvement. But what it tends to break down to, as I'm sure you're probably all aware, is for any learning, for any kid or class, the learning should be accessible, purposeful, and interesting. By which I mean, by accessible, that when the kids start in the lesson, it's not immediately over their head or they don't know how to join in the first place. They should have some sort of solid footing and feel, I can progress in this lesson. There should be purpose so that they actually understand the value of that learning and want to develop that skill or that understanding, and they can use it outside the lesson as well. And in terms of interesting, it should just outright be fun or it's something that they want to be involved in. So in terms of in class and out, my main point for the accessible part is that when you're using tech, it has to work. I'm sure we've all had 1 or 2 or 10 of those ICT lessons where everything's set up and you're ready to go, and be it an internet failure or a login failure or something like that, the lesson just goes awry. And we've all seen when you can't even expect the kids to be able to be sat and focused while nothing is happening. The worst we had during the lockdown was we spent ages planning this really exciting book topic for P7. They were going to use the online library. We had a bunch of interesting resources made. It was going to be great. When it came down to the day, as it turned out, the pupils' login codes, there was a privacy issue, which meant that none of them could access the book, and it all went awry. And it's those kind of things that can completely shake a lesson, and it's really hard to come back from, and for the kids to have faith in the learning, with considering everything that's going on. So, as well as you checking that tech works, if you ever have, if you have access to some sort of, a pupil profile as well, to make sure that any of those extra things you're using works. It's a strong recommend from here. Tech is becoming more and more integral to what we're doing because of the current environment. So whether you're a tech aficionado like Andrew or you're one who's pretty terrified of tech like me, figuring out exactly how what you're going to do works is entirely essential for you and for the kids. Going on from that, the tech you're using should be immediately simple and inviting. I'm sure we've all been recommended at some point a piece of tech or something online where you look at it and you have absolutely no idea how it works. So when you introduce it to the kids, they don't really have much of a clue either, and that is pretty disheartening. So finding technology, not because you feel you have to use the tech because it's part of the curriculum, but finding a piece of tech where actually it makes the learning better for the kids and it makes the teaching better for you. That's what it should be about. It's not about impressing anyone or ticking any boxes. It's about this can help my kids and this can help me. And there are some things where when I'm introducing a new piece of tech, I'll pretty much have that first lesson where the learning intention is learning how to use it. And then the rest of the lessons, because the kids' understanding and my understanding of it has been really cemented, then you can go on to teach a whole series of new things or in a new series of ways which you might not have been able to without it. I would so love often to just be having a blackboard and chalk and avoid the tech altogether. But actually, as through this lockdown, I actually have come to accept and realize tech is important, and it's made me a better teacher using some of these new tech things. So I really encourage exploring some of those things, asking people who know about tech to really introduce that to you. And if you are techie people, find new ways of using that, which we're going to go into. Going into the purposeful element, you're going to hear us hammering on about the learning should have a real world context. I'm sure we've all been in those lessons or had those lessons where it feels so textbooky that actually it's never something you would remember doing, teacher or kid. And they're the ones which we all want to avoid as much as possible. So any links for the learning to link to the real world that they're in, Then the kids can talk about it at the dinner table with the parents, and then it can expand and they'll learn more about it outside. And we have put as much focus as we can with our upper stage kids into getting real world context to everything they're doing. And it makes them value the learning so much more, and it makes it more accessible for them as well. They will have their own perspective. So when it comes down to the technology elements, the best way to have a real world context is making it something they would actually want to use. There's a thing called Scratch, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, where it's a sort of kid-based coding program where they can make their own games and things like that. And so often that's such a big hit that the kids tend to use it at home and end up getting far more knowledgeable about it than you are. And that's great. The kids who can teach it in the class as well, they feel so valued, and that's fantastic. And even things like Google Slides or PowerPoint, it's not the most jazziest thing to use, but then the kids can use it in their literacy presentations, they can use it in IDL presentations, and they can use it for out of school things like Andrew and I are doing right now. So an understanding of how these things work and telling them why it's important, be it in the class or out these days, especially when they're not in the class and it's home learning. It helps our kids so much, and I'm sure you've all felt the value of that before. And in terms of interest, it's definitely harder to keep them motivated and engaged and interested when it's that home learning. So finding new interesting topics or tech features which can be flexible and offer a new perspective to the learning, that can really make it more interesting and fun. We're going to be talking about formative quiz things we can use, and new ways of engaging with and showing the learning, which can appeal visually, auditory, and kinesthetically. These things they really help make it interesting, and the motivation soars when you can tick those boxes, and it makes it easier for you planning and hosting as well. Right, and we're going on to the next slide where it's Andrew's turn again.
Well, as you can see, we've got a really high-tech way of moving around the classroom on chairs with wheels. Now, looking at the impacts on learners and assessment, how can we use this technology while at the same time carrying out that nurturing thing that we should be doing with the children, and making that a smooth transition from what has been 4 or 5 months of being off school and doing school on Google Classroom or on Teams to that. And we've tried to do that with a number of different things. We've used in our literacy and our numeracy work and our health and well-being work, we've wanted to try and use technology to help us to make things slightly easier, but at the same time to build on how the children have moved forward in their use of technology. So when we've been carrying out our scenario assessments, for example, our baseline assessments, once the children have been in school for a little while, then we used that using Microsoft Forms or Google Forms, and that was such an easier way as teachers to use the technology to really dedicate the time to what we feel is important, which is actually teaching and moving forward the learning in the classroom. We also use things like Kahoots to help us, and Quizizz, which is another one, and Quizlet, where we have used that at the start of a topic or the start of an activity in literacy or numeracy as a pre-assessment, as an introduction to the topic. It's something that the children got quite used to, obviously during lockdown, because for needs be, but we wanted to take that to a next level and integrate it into part of our assessment work. Also giving them, showing them what successful and good pieces of work look like. We have work that we've got from last year, from our previous primary 7, from this year's primary 7, from work that we've done moderating activities with the children, and giving them, not just in school but at home, activities where they can see this is what a successful piece of writing looks like. This is what we're looking for that really meets the learning intentions and the success criteria, and getting them to analyze what doesn't. And that obviously leads us into other things which we're going to talk about a little bit later when it comes to how assessment's been affected by the COVID regulations and handling jotters and things like that. So helping them to develop their peer feedback and how they can feedback to each other, how we can have things that are correcting self-assessment. Obviously, a lot of the things like Kahoot automatically correct, but we can use Google Forms, Microsoft Forms in a quiz format so that the work can be auto-corrected. It takes a little bit of work to set up, but it can be done. And also looking at our questioning techniques and how we're questioning, writing and developing the questions in our assessment, whether it's in Kahoots or Google Forms or Microsoft Forms, and not just our questioning in the classroom. What are we actually trying to find out from the children if we're doing this type of assessment digitally with forms or Kahoots? Have we made the question, has it been formulated in the correct way? Are we finding out the information we really want to get from our learners? And then being able, with them, using the technology to reflect on our next steps in learning, and things like apps like Flipgrid, which we've used in literacy and in modern foreign languages in Spanish, are really useful and have got really excellent tools that are designed for that. So, when we've been thinking about the impact on learners and looking at assessment, that's what we've been looking at in our classroom, which obviously is a primary 7 classroom, but different. There can be variations on that further down in the early years, in primary 1, primary 2, and in the middle part of primary as well. So I'm now going to pass you on to Rory, who's going to talk a little bit about stimulating environment and real-world contexts.
Okay, as promised, I will be harping on about the real-world context, and it is something I absolutely believe to my core is the way to really not just motivate the kids, but get them to really care about their work. I think from P1 to P7, what we really want to encourage is it's not just work that is acceptable, but you want to get the kids to do something that they are proud of. That's right up there with the higher order thinking skills. It's not just getting the job done, but getting the job done to something to their own standards. And the best way to encourage that is to have a real world context. If they're purely assessing their success by what is in the back of a textbook, then it doesn't really mean anything to them. They're judging it by someone else's standards. So where possible, we always try and put such a real world context into their learning that they know why they're doing it, why they should care, and why we're teaching it in the first place. And the best place to be able to really push for that is in your ideal topic selections. A lot of the time, we don't always get necessarily the freedom to choose exactly what we'd like to do, but there's always new perspectives you can put on any topic to be able to make it come alive. My favorite one by far was the one we started last year and I've done this year as well, where it's about creativity. So we had it, because we've got quite passionate, strange students, we did a big focus on the Beatles. And every day, to boost their literacy, we'd listen to a song of the day where they had to tell us what the song might have been about, what it sounded like, and their opinions on it. And the point of that was really to not just boost their comprehension, but to make them be able to explain answers and justify. Now, I'm sure we can all imagine many ways where you could teach them the skill of justification in a terribly dry and frustrating way where unfortunately you didn't meet the criteria of 2B4 on that textbook. But by offering it a real world context, they can look at each other's work and say, oh, I completely understand your opinion. I really get that. And they've been able to use those kind of skills in so many other things as well. I really do find the more real world context driven it is, the more flexible and accessible this learning is to many other areas. The final point you'll see there, learning is more adaptable when pupils move to secondary or move to a different school. If the less their learning is based on a very specific system and more based on skills and understanding of the real world, it means that say that kid moves in P2 to P3 in another school, the learning they've got will stick with them. Say when the kid goes from P7 to secondary, where they might be getting several different primary schools learning and teaching coming into one place, their learning will be very adaptable wherever they go. It really, the test of their learning is, can they talk about it at the dinner table with the family? And the more they understand where their learning fits into the real world, the more they are able to do that and talk about it and further that learning. And it's so exciting when they can really engage with it like that. There is a place for textbooks in the classroom, and I do believe that, for furthering and testing that skill as we go along. But I certainly think introducing the skill, introducing the concept, that's really where the more you can link it to the real world, the more they are going to care and understand it. And if they can value their learning, that's the main goal. Right, about to slide on over again. Wow.
Okay, so we thought when we came back after in August, we thought, how can we create a stimulating environment, and how can we create pathways, for the children to carry out their learning. One of the things that we found during lockdown, which I'm sure many of you will have found as well, was, when you start to produce materials, or you're using materials that you found in a Google Classroom or in Microsoft Teams, very quickly you've got it creates exponentially a huge amount of electronic paperwork and bits and pieces. And unless you are highly organized, and even if you are highly organized and you have everything in folders, it starts to become very quickly unmanageable. And that was one thing that we found really, really quickly. For example, in Google Classroom, we started out doing it by subjects, and ended up moving in Google Classroom to, no, we're going to put everything of the day and the date. So, it's all under that. But one way which we found was really important was to start to create, and we used Google Sites, but the same thing could be done in Sway. We started putting our materials together to create, I suppose you could say, in a way that's slightly more secondary orientated, but could be done at any level. And what we did was we created Google Sites for each of our different topics. If it was a math topic on data handling, or it was an aspect of literacy such as comprehension. And so over the summer, when we were thinking about coming back to school and getting back into normality, so to speak, we thought, how can we use these materials and how can we make these available? So we decided, although at the start it was mooted that there was going to be a blended or a flipped learning approach from the Scottish government, but then we were all luckily able to come back into school. The majority of us were in a phased way. We decided to follow a blended pathway using the materials we created plus new materials, so that the children could not just make use of those in school, but also could make use of those at home. And to give you an idea, some of the Google Sites, we would have an aspect of one of the topics, and then at the bottom of that site, embedded in the site, there might be an explanatory video from ourselves, a video that we found that was really useful. There might be worksheets there that we put. Some of them were self-correcting, some were not. And there would be also things like Kahoots. And that allowed us to, as we had built up a bank of those, to have a bank of resources that we could then not just share on Google Classroom, which is a great tool, but I suppose as well, like Microsoft Teams, a little bit dry. But we created a website for our learners and for the parents where that material can be accessed outside of school. And we actively encourage the pupils to be looking at those things. So you've done a lesson today on ambitious openers in literacy, or interesting vocabulary, or an aspect of creative writing, or on percentages, fractions and decimals. You can go back and look at the work that you've done in the classroom. You can look also at what we're going to be looking at in the next lessons, so you can see where we're going. That combined also with differentiated work that we created during the lockdown period, and then very much used, we'd obviously done it before, we didn't just differentiate when we were doing it on lockdown, but we decided technology helped us to create a number of differentiated activities, whether those were online worksheets or worksheets that were printed off and in class, that allowed the children to choose their pathway through the learning, with the end point being, the learning intentions that we had for each of those different differentiated groups, but with a very clear endpoint for them, and allowed us to have a mild, a spicy, or a muy picante, a very spicy option when it came to their differentiated work, and also allowed us to really build in self-assessment, peer assessment, and teacher assessment, which in the current situation we're in has to be very different from what we would normally be looking at. So I'm now going to pass you on to Rory, who will talk a little bit more about trying to create that stimulating environment.
Now, as we're all aware, the changes to education that COVID has caused has been really hard for all of us in many different ways. But as teachers, we might grumble occasionally and find things stressful and hard, but we are resilient and we are adaptable. And we absolutely look for any signs of positivity where we can. So one surprising and specific area that the lockdown actually offered our class anyway was actually in the differentiated learning area. Now, I'm sure we all have our own memories from school as well, where you're so focused on which group which person's in. I was in the middle group for maths, and I was always thinking, oh, why can't I be in the top group? And so much of the children's confidence and self-value can come from assessing each other by which groups they're in. Now, what we found quite nice about the lockdown is when we were offering our children the choices of difficulty for each of their work, the social aspect of that actually stopped having relevance. The kids in their own environment were able to say, you know what, I'm going to go for the mild option of work today, and I don't have to worry about other people seeing that. Or I might try the really hard muy caliente one, and if it doesn't work out, no one else is going to be there to see that. Now, that's a really nice sentiment. I'm really passionate about the health and well-being of my kids, and I'm sure you are all as well. So coming back to school from that was something I was really passionate about trying to instill in the classroom. Now, especially with the older kids, where possible, being able to offer the difficulty they choose can so develop their confidence and stop the limits on their learning. You never want that feeling where there's a cap on their learning or that it's too hard and they can't access it. But being able to choose from mild, spicy, or muy caliente really offers the kids that flexibility in how they want to learn. And especially, again, with that real world context, they understand the value of it and will therefore, was what we found, pick the difficulty that they think is best for them. Say they're having a tough day on maths, they might start on the mild. Or say they're feeling particularly confident, they'll try the muy caliente on that comprehension. Especially when it's home learning. So you could do this for homework tasks and things like that as well. Them choosing their own difficulty. There's no social aspect to that at all. So any of the fears and apprehension they might feel about, can I pick this difficulty with anyone watching? That's completely gone when it's home learning, be it homework or if we're in another lockdown. So I'd encourage that sort of mentality for when you're thinking about offering the different sort of challenges and accessibility to your work. So in things like spelling assessments and maths and all those sort of things, instead of often just prescribing the groups that they're in, where appropriate and possible, often offering what difficulty they can choose from really helps the kids' mental well-being. Our spelling homework, we exclusively now do the mild, spicy, and muy caliente options, which they can choose from. And they might differ each week, and that's absolutely fine. They have chosen their learning, and therefore it has more value for them. And now on to Andrew for displays.
Okay, now going back a little bit to motivation and engagement, it's really important, as we all know, as professional teachers, to create a motivational and interesting environment where learners really feel at home and they really want to be engaged with what they're doing. So obviously we want to create an online classroom and an environment in our own classrooms which is inviting for them. So looking at that, we really felt, well, Google Classroom, which is what we use here in Aberdeen, and I realize quite a few of you we use Microsoft Teams, isn't always terribly inviting. So how can we do this? And how at the same time can we showcase their work, around school, apart from and to a wider audience, not just putting things up on the wall, which is lovely. So, that can be done through Google Classroom, but we very quickly tried to get up and running our website, a Primary 7 website, which, apart from having resources on it for the children and for their parents, also showcases the work. Also social media, looking at what they're doing, whether it's Maths Week Scotland or Book Week. And one thing that's been a big help there have been programs and apps like Flipgrid, where we were able to do something which normally would seem very easy, like choosing house captains for our houses in the school. We can't get groups of children together. We can't mix our classes. So the Primary 7s created, with help from the principal teacher, they created a short video where they had to put forward their candidature and say why they should be picked. And I have to say, I was incredibly impressed, not just with the technology working, but we've been doing a lot of work on them justifying in class, in literacy, justifying the ideas they're writing down and explaining things and going into details, also being concise. And by golly, with the minute and a half they had, we were really able to see, although it wasn't a literacy assessment, we were really able to see, gosh, they really have learned all that stuff. And when we'd assessed them, we thought, yes, they really are where we think they are. But it was such a good way to see them put into practice what they had been learning in class. It's also going back to what Rory's saying, because we were in a slightly more drier and not as interesting atmosphere and environment back during lockdown, and we wanted to make things as engaging and motivational as possible. It's really important, and having Primary 7s obviously going off to S1 soon and transitioning, it's really important as well to give them that real world context. And things like Black Lives Matter, which has been so much in the news the last couple of months with the racial tensions in the United States. And we have our class has a very different and multi-ethnic background, which is lovely. And that is something that a number of our pupils who are from a BAME background have very much taken to heart. So we've really wanted to go with the interests and the motivation of our learners, along with looking at numeracy and literacy, our science work, equity, which has played a big part in what we've been talking about since we've come back, and obviously sustainability, which is not just a buzzword at the moment, but really important when we're talking about the environment. The children are all very aware of people like Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough, who has been very much in the news talking about, we have a limited time for our planet. So that has helped us. I mean, we've always had some free tools or free things given to us with the events that have happened in the world over the last couple of months that have really helped us grab and engage our learners. Kind of moving on from there a little bit, talking about assessment, with jotters, how can I check my literacy? How can I do that if I've got to, how am I going to organize things? How does this logistically work if I've got to quarantine them 72 hours, then I've got to get them back to them. So obviously we're using a mixture of things that like self and peer assessment we've used a lot, and having the answer sheets or activities they're using on their Chromebooks or at home, which have things that will self-assess and self-answer. Building differentiated assessments. So when we're looking at baseline assessments at the start, when we looked at those at the start of the session, and when we finished a module of work or an activity, having a differentiated assessment, so much easier we found using things like Google Forms or Microsoft Forms. It has a quick a quiz function in that. If you haven't used it, I'm sure you probably have, but if you haven't, it has a quiz function which allows you to input the correct answers. Now that obviously isn't always suitable, because you might want to see the mechanics behind the child's answer. I did a course with Northern Alliance during the summer about maths moderation, and we've all, I'm sure, done quite a lot of work on moderation recently, and being able to use electronic means to moderate children's work, so not this time having a correcting Google form or Microsoft form, but asking the children to explain their answer also helps me with my colleague Rory and colleagues in other parts of the school to then moderate and look at the levels that the children have. Using Kahoots and Quizizz and things like that, as I say, for pre-assessments, warm-up activities, getting them thinking during the work that we're doing, breaking it up a bit, giving them a different pathway to go down. I'm finding this part of the learning really difficult, so I'm going to go off into this activity. And all of this is not just worked on the interactive whiteboard in the classroom, but it's available for the learners at home, so they can go back and use it. And all of it records the amount of times obviously they use it. It records their answers. And things like Flipgrid have been vital for us when we've looked at assessing literacy. That has been a huge aspect, and I know Rory will talk to you about that. Looking at speaking and comprehension skills and assessing modern foreign languages. And also those pupils, when we were doing presentations, which I know Rory will talk to you in more depth about, who are shy and really don't want to present in front of the class, the opportunity of being able to record a video, or can I record this and do it that way, for certain of our learners who don't have the confidence to stand up in front of the class, has been a godsend. So I'm now going to pass you back to Rory, who is going to go into more depth about Flipgrid.
Thank you. Well, he very cheekily stole a lot of my points there, but we're just going to roll on through anyway. Coming from the perspective of someone who, I don't have the greatest initiative at learning new tech things. I've got the enthusiasm these days, but the initiative, it takes me a wee bit longer. But I promise you, to all you people who struggled for 20 minutes to get your Glow login today, Flipgrid, it's so accessible and easy. If I can manage it, I promise you can. As Andrew's saying, it's this wonderful website where the kids are able to record a presentation, which they can very easily pause and edit if they want to add some style and flavor to it as well. So it gets the video editing aspect in too, but it's a very accessible, easy and fun way for them to offer presentations. I think the best thing I found about it really surprised me quite recently, where I did my class's first presentation in front of the class, and as you know, they always tend to be quite ranged, but they gave it some good gusto. But then later on a Flipgrid homework task, they had to do a dramatic reading of a few pages of a chapter from The Hobbit with, great Gollum impressions going around. And the feedback I got from a lot of the parents is that was the first time they actually saw themselves present. Obviously, when you're standing there presenting yourself, you're not fully aware of how you're doing. So I can't wait to see the playback of how I'm doing now. But what was really interesting is my kids, who thought they were doing quite well, but bless them, were presenting a little bit flat or a bit skittish and all over the place. They were able to see that and comment themselves, realizing, oh, this is what you were talking about. And again, it puts it into that context. So it's really useful for them, and for the teacher, it's really clear and easy to use. There are many settings which are completely optional, where you could choose to have the kids all see each other's presentations as well and comment the positive comments on it. If you think the comments might go the other way, you can disable comments. And in fact, you can even make sure that the kids can't see each other's presentations at all, and that's absolutely fine. It's great in that you can not only just type the instructions to a task, but you could actually record your own video explaining what you want it to do, and you can add personality and style, and you can have filters and pictures of dragons next to you and things if you want. Whatever appeals to your kids, you have to be flexible there. But what we found is it's really useful for them being self-aware of their own work, and you can use it for literacy presentations, IDL presentations. It's fantastic for when you're teaching foreign languages, when we're doing Spanish, and especially during lockdown, where you can't reasonably hear how they're speaking. They can record their submissions, and then you can see exactly how they're doing. And there's a variety of ways you can mark it as well. You could leave video feedback, you can leave a score, you can leave written feedback, and you can even do things where they can peer assess and or just talk in general as how the class is done. There's a wide variety of options, and I love the flexibility of it. The best schools have teachers that work in a variety of different ways, but I really feel like Flipgrid is one that any teacher can have their own way of using it. Now, there are other things as well. And as Andrew was saying earlier, Google Sites has been a pretty fantastic resource for us. Again, it's really easy to use. I was able to make a half-decent website for our P7 classes, and I am just not that technically able. So I was really excited to see how easy I could put things on it. What I found is it's really helped the kids' relationship to learning, the parents' relationship to as teachers, and it's really helped the kids and parents when they're working together at home. I'm sure we've all heard those arguments where the pupils are trying to do their maths homework one way and wanting the parents help, but the parents learn math the other way, and it can be a whole complicated affair where no one wins in the end. But what Andrew and I tend to do is anytime we make our own resources or use other resources, for example, PowerPoints and worksheets and things we've made ourselves and things like that, or videos, we can easily put them all up on the website, our P7 site, so the parents have access to it, so they can see how we've taught it and then continue that lesson with their children. Or the kids can access it themselves. Any lesson I create resources for or use things, I always put it on there and put the context of what we've done. And I don't have much of an interest in doing things where it doesn't help anybody and it's entirely cumbersome, but it's fantastically easy for me to be able to do it because the site's linked to your drive and everything, so it's great. And it has been such a help. When I'm doing my parents' evenings, there's none of that time wasted with the consistent same questions, which could have easily been answered if the parents had been able to see what we're doing in class. And this allows that. We used to use Class Dojo for our class blog that was able to share some of that, we were sad to lose it, but this has actually been able to fill that void, and it's been great. And I use Google Sites to create the P7 website in general. Andrew uses Google Sites to do specific topics in maths and things like that. And it's really helped the kids because it makes their learning more accessible, which was exactly what I was talking about at the start. And that's what I call fantastic presenting skills. But this really helps and is really easy to understand. So I highly encourage Flipgrid to make the learning fun and accessible, and Sites as a good way to organize your own learning and help the parents and kids. And the best part is, if like us, you get the same year again. So say you had P7 first year, then you do it second year. A lot of the time, those resources you've made on the Google Sites, you can use them again next year and then use that time you've saved to dive into the specifics of that class and help them with all that time, which is sometimes really hard to find. So these examples of using easy tech to not only do an acceptable job, but to better your teaching and practice is so essential. I've become such a better teacher over the last year, thanks to understanding this tech and seeing where it can take me. The different ways I can teach the class has helped infuse them and make it more accessible. So I really heartfeltly encourage this. He's coming.
Okay, now going back a little bit on what Rory was saying, if you're not using, for example, Google G Suite as we are, then the same sort of thing, the websites and things could be done using Sway. Just as Google Forms has, you've got the equivalent of Microsoft Forms. Now we're going to be talking about technology a little bit later on, but showing you the things that we have used and what we've created with them. But we were talking a moment ago about assessment, and these are some of the things that we've used. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with them, using Kahoot for their quizzes, Plickers, which we've used sometimes, which have those similar to QR codes, which you can stick in the back of the jotters, or have them printed on cards, so that the children can then hold them up at different angles, and depending on the angle they're holding it up, it gives its answer A, B, C, or D. Very useful for a low-tech if you haven't got a lot of access all of the time to things like Chromebooks or laptops. We don't have, I think are due shortly to have our own special Chromebooks for the children, but we have them a couple of times a week. But Kahoot can still be done on paper. We have created some little sheets where the children can answer, either circling the shape or writing down the answer. Quizlet, very similar to Kahoot. Google Forms, you will have used a lot, if not Microsoft Forms, for creating feedback sheets, getting some feedback from the pupils, which we also use another app for, which we'll talk about. Quizizz and Socrative. So those are all types of software that we've used for assessment, but we'll be looking at other ones, as I say, a little bit later on. What I wanted to talk about now a little bit was, those low order thinking skills and the high order thinking skills. Now we've used a kind of mixture, blended learning stroke flipped learning. So, obviously if we look at the traditional, pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy of, creating being at the top and evaluating and analyzing as high order thinking skills and then applying, understanding, remembering. When we've used our blended model and tried to, integrate aspects of flipped learning into our classroom, flipped and blended learning into our classroom, then, things like our use of Google Sites or Sway with the information on it, on the class website, on the websites that are specifically for a topic, whether that's literacy or whether that is numeracy or an aspect of health and well-being, we can get them to do, that can be done at home, that can be done, something that they can be looking at with their parents. And then that means that the tasks we're doing in class, obviously we are going to go over that material because not every child will have access to be able to do that at home. But it does mean that we have more time to apply, to use those aspects of Bloom's taxonomy when it comes to applying and analysing. And then our homework or our next steps for the learners, whether that's a piece of homework, whether that's a project that they're doing over a number of weeks, can then be more looking at the high order thinking skills of creating and evaluating. So kind of how does that break down? Well, we see, the things we tend to put on our class website are kind of the videos, podcasts, articles, things that we found interesting, blogs, books, not just suggestions for books, but books that they can be looking at electronically. And those are, focusing really on the low order thinking skills. There are obviously some high order thinking skills there, but they're focusing more on the low order thinking skills, so that when we got them in our classroom and we're trying to make sure they're engaged and as motivated as possible, and also, developing and pushing forward their learning, then we're looking at group work. Now, obviously, group work in COVID times looks a lot more different than what it might do normally, but we still try in the tables that they're on, the bubbles that they have in the classroom, to keep that group work ethos going, and pair work, and obviously task-based activities which involve them, whether it's in numeracy every week or during one of our numeracy lessons every week, is a very much hands-on task-based workshop activity which has had some input on our website. It's had input in the classroom and involves them drawing together the learning that they've been doing into a piece of group work, which is normally a mixed ability group. So the model we've kind of tried to use, and I'm not saying that we've done it perfectly by any means, is that flipped learning stroke blended learning, where we're obviously very much wanting to push the learning forward and develop our learners, but at the same time we're guiding them from the side. It's going back a little bit to the idea of the pathways of learning that we've tried to think of differentiating the work very much. Sometimes we've had 4 or 5 levels now. That's not easy, and you can't do it with everything. We're professional teachers like yourselves, and you can't differentiate every single task. Some are not, some you can't do, but as much as possible. to get the children back into the swing of their learning after that time off, which isn't time off, they've been working, but the time away from school. So they're learning at their own pace, but they're learning with their peers, and that idea of a sliding scale in the work they're doing in class and online, which allows them to go back and reinforce their learning, but at the same time extend their learning. Allowing our learners to contribute, and not just, as Rory was saying, presenting face to the class about an aspect of their learning, which was we did a presentation on why somebody who's important to you, whether a famous person or a member of your family, but being able to do that also using technology and be able to reflect, and realize, and be able to really critique what they're doing. And we found that's really enriched our group work and our projects, and we've been able to really target in on those children that have a need extension, but also those children that require that extra reinforcement. So that's how we've tried to do that. And now Rory will talk to you a little bit about pedagogy and assessment.
Right, so like most areas in education, COVID's done a pretty good job of making assessment a lot harder. We can't really touch and engage in the kids' jotters as much as we normally would. We've got less time per day in the class, adhering to the safety rules, of course. And we want to avoid as much pupil stress as possible, considering what they're all going through. And ideally, avoid as much teacher stress as well. So I'm going to quickly share with you some of our reflections on what's worked best for us recently, considering all these, and how to further help enthuse, engage the kids and save us time and stress while not lowering the standard of learning and teaching for the children. I'm going to break it down into three sections really. There's the formative assessments, and then the summative, coming down to self-marking, and the auto-marking, which I'll talk about in a sec. Now, in terms of our formative assessment, this has probably become more important than ever, in that so much of how we can gauge our kids' learning in class right now is coming from the formative, and it is becoming harder to judge engage with their summative. So organically fitting this into as many lessons as possible is sort of a background aim of ours. And what the things we found that not only help further educate us about the children's strengths and areas of development, but the things that really get the kids engaged are some great tech things like Kahoots and Quizizz, which are sort of, and I've put here, fun and amiably competitive quiz features. I'm sure we've all done some quizzes and tests here and there, which has left a few kids in tears, and that's never what you want to do. But the Kahoots especially is a sort of time-based, quick offer of one multiple choice quiz. And what we found is, because it's got such a friendly nature to it, that actually it tends to never leave any of the kids out in the cold, but actually brings the classes together. Andrew and I, we have our two P7 classes next to each other. And generally once a week, one of our maths lessons will have end in a Kahoots quiz, where each of the kids will write down their answers on the board and then share their answer, and we'll click on the answer on the board. And it's always exciting to see which class wins each week. And the kids our classes really get into it positively. They help each other out, and it's competitive without getting to the point where one has to be better than the other. It's a friendly form of competition, which I'm always for, rather than the opposite. And the best part for me is that it's nice and easy to use. Now, in terms of the self-marking, by this I mean the type of assessment or work where the kids are able to mark it themselves. Now, this feels very against a teacher's instinct. Yeah, it feels sort of dishonorable to do this sometimes, but what we really have to consider during these times is working hard isn't enough. We also have to work smart. And there are some bits of work and things like that where actually getting the kids to be able to mark their own work, or the peers to mark their work, not only saves time, but actually offers a brand new perspective to the learning. When we were in the lockdown, to offer a bit of structure and structure to their learning. On Tuesdays, we offered those SRA comprehension pieces where, again, mild, spicy, and muy caliente options. We'd post those at 9 o'clock, and then at 2:30 at the end of the day, the answers would be posted and they can mark it themselves. And similar to what I was saying about choosing their own difficulty, the only people seeing their marks are the teachers and themselves. So the social aspect of their scoring, it was rendered moot. And the fact that they are answering to their own marking, we found it sort of encouraged them to try and hone on those skills and progress, so that each week they could see themselves getting their score higher. It wasn't about trying to convince the teacher to give the extra mark. They could see the facts there. Can I get my scores better? And how am I going to do that? I guess I'll have to engage in the lesson and try my best. So that not only is COVID safe, but it offers a brand new perspective. So anytime when you can see a positive to something, I'm always trying to find that. So work like that can really not only save time, but offer something new. And where possible, the auto marking is fantastic. If you use Microsoft Forms or Google Forms and you create a formative or more summative assessment on those, that where appropriate can be still a fantastic form of assessment, but it immediately gives you those answers, because if there's a way of it being able to mark itself, but you were doing it by hand, that could easily be a time sink. Whereas with these Google Forms, we're able to see our place value assessments, that all of the answers there for individual kid and the whole class, so we could dive into their strengths and areas of development and really have the time to do that. Now, this can't work all the time. In something where they need to show working, or it's more open answers, that's not the system that's probably going to work for you. But things where there are specific answers that don't necessarily need working, I highly encourage doing something like that. To have the time to really talk to the kids about their assessment or make choices based on that without having to do that at 9 p.m. is fantastic. Where possible, that can really, really help you. Now, that's my last slide, and I'll pass you on to Andrew for our stunning conclusion.
I'm not sure it'll be stunning, but we'll do our best. I'm aware that time is moving on, so we'll go quite quickly through things. And I'm very grateful for everybody who's taken time after school to come and listen to us. It is by no means a silver bullet what we're suggesting. It's things that have worked for us. Technology is a real engager, and it's great at motivating children. I mean, there have been no longitudinal studies that have been able to show that technology at the moment, improves attainment or improves academic levels. But boy, does it engage, just as other things do as well. And so, I thought this quote here of 76.5% of teachers believe that students are more engaged in their learning when technology is integrated into instructional activities. As somebody who's worked a lot in technology in schools and university, I think that's really important. It's really important not just to replicate work that we could do, analogically in a jotter, having them copying out their story, but new activities that really drive on the technology and push forward the learning as well, not just replicating, which we may do at some points, things that can be done, in a jotter or etc. We found it's been very important to have high touch learning, and by that I mean, learning is getting the kids really involved in things. And obviously, in the COVID pandemic that we're in at the moment, there's the question of making sure everything is sanitized, cleaning it before, cleaning it afterwards, cleaning laptops, etc. So that's important. But we found it really important to try and keep our group work going in class, not just online or at home, so that those children are getting that high touch learning, that learning being doing. If I do it, I start to understand it better. Making things a lot more interactive so that children can then access their learning and reinforce the work that they've done. That's why we've developed a lot of these Google sites, which can be done also on Sway, where the children can reinforce the work and on what they've been doing. And sorry, I just seem to have lost my thing. There we go. And being able to give them much more we've tried to give them much more personalised learning. Now, I don't know if we were in primary 7 last year, we're in primary 7 this year. I really don't know if I'll be in primary 7 next year. They'll probably get sick and tired of me being in primary 7, but we have a base of activities and work that we can pass on to other teachers in our school, which obviously is focused on primary 7. Now, lots of the things we're talking about are very much focused on P7. Variations of those obviously can be used in primary 1, can be used in primary 3, can be used in S1. And, you know, it gives a chance for children to be able, when they have these activities, and we use this blended learning formula, this blended learning way of doing things, for them to then go back, have a look at their learning and take ownership of things and have a look at that. And we've had lots of learning conversations with our pupils where they've said, you know, I did do that last night. I have been looking at that. And you can see from the comments, either you get online or comments in the classroom. And that has really been beneficial, especially for those pupils that found things a little bit more difficult. Sorry, it just seemed to have got stuck. There we go. John Hattie, you may have caught a webinar of his it was just at the end of the session, just at the end of term. And he talked about building back better, which has become a buzzword, not just with education, but with everything, including Joe Biden. And he talked a lot about, you know, success criteria, including peer and social learning, you know, teaching them how to work in different groups. So obviously that has to be done very carefully and following the COVID guidelines, but they've been for 4 or 5 months working by themselves. So that ability to work together as pairs, work in a small group, form a larger group. I haven't seen recent inspections of HMI in Scotland, but you will have seen in the news recently about Ofsted in England talking about how children's learning has been affected, and how young children were playing by themselves, didn't know how to play. How much of that is, you know, being exaggerated a little bit by the press and how much is actually true, but the underlying thing of that is that it's really important to get them back into the way of those things. And that was what John Hattie said. Using formative assessment, and we've used the technology there to help our formative assessment. Teacher clarity. As somebody who's a dyslexic and has problems with my attention span, I have found technology vital, and it's been able to keep me organised and help me be very clear in my learning intentions and in my work with the pupils. And being able to model using the technology and give them examples in class, either digitally or analogically, of what success looks like has been vital for us to really push our classes forward since August. And the feedback, I mean, one of the things he mentions is the feedback, less about the feedback they get, but more about the feedback you get from them. It's really important to listen to them. And we all know that as professional teachers, and tools like Flipgrid have allowed us to do that. But because we have used this blended form of and flipped learning and blended learning a little bit together, we have had more time to be able to do that, because, you know, things like Shinaris and other maths little assessments and activities, as we've used technology, it's really given us a chance to use and to be able to listen to our learners.
Andrew,
and feeding forward.
We've got a question in the chat. I'm a
Yes.
primary 7 teacher, and since returning to work in August, we have not been able to use technology in the class. We normally have 12 iPads and 6 laptops. However, at the moment, management don't feel we can hand these out safely during COVID. Can I ask what you are doing to ensure the technology is cleaned safely?
Yeah, we have a set of Chromebooks which we're using in primary, and we are sanitizing those after every use. So, for example, tomorrow I have primary 7, both the classes, first one then the other for digital learning. They arrive sanitized at the classroom, they're handed out, and then before they are handed back in, and each child individually with a special wet towel that we've got, which I may even have the package here. We sanitize earphones if they've been used, although we've encouraged them to bring in one or two do bring their own earphones in, but we encourage them to use the school's ones. but we get them to sanitize earphones and sanitize the Chromebook. The Chromebooks are then stored and charged up again, ready for the next class. And we've found that has worked well.
Brilliant. Andrew and Rory, I just want to thank you so much for enthusiastically sharing your experiences this afternoon, how you're using a wide range of digital tools to engage and motivate learners. There's lots of people still on the call, so I think we'll just pause for a second to see if anybody's got any questions or feedback or comments.
Of course.
It might be quicker just putting your microphone on rather than using the chat. It's entirely up to yourselves. Oh, great feedback in the chat.
I've just popped up on the screen. These are the software that we've principally used.
Brilliant. Are we okay to share the slides, Andrew and Rory?
Yes. Yeah, one thing we found very useful, yes, definitely. One thing that we've used quite a lot, and we started using recently, well, I used it a bit in lockdown and we used it a bit at the start of the year, but we've used a lot recently, is something called Classroom Screen, which is kind of it's like an interactive screen in the Explorer tab, whether it's Chrome or Firefox, and it allows us to do a lot of things very quickly, putting up information for the pupils that you might normally write on a whiteboard. But we used it a lot in numeracy and literacy, where we've had little polls at the end of the day. We haven't got any Chromebooks, or we've had a poll at the end of the class where we've asked the children, right, how did you feel your learning went? It might be, how do you feel, if we're looking at health and well-being thing, or with numeracy, it was how do you feel in relation to this learning intention? And it has little faces, so you can say, I'm feeling really sad, I'm feeling really good, or I'm feeling so about this, and that's been very useful. So this is a list of what we've been using most, which I'm sure a lot of people will know, but if anybody needs any.
I have put an evaluation into the chat. It'd be great to get some feedback from yourselves and what you'd like to see next. One question, Andrew, what's the name of the wipes that you're using?
The ones we are using are called Sure San antibacterial wipes. We use something called COVID Guard. I think it is a pink thing on the desks, but we noticed it was starting to take some of the paint off the desk, so we don't use that. We don't use that on the computers for reasons I need to explain. But we found that we've taught the children how to thoroughly clean the Chromebooks, and they're quite sturdy. It's not ideal, but we also say to them in the use of the Chromebooks, and the use of the material, don't be touching your eyes, don't be touching your face, put fingers in your mouth, the usual things you would say as a teacher anyway. So I think we found that and that's something that we're doing school-wide. So, any teacher who's using the Chromebooks, has booked them, is doing that, following that protocol.
And a lot of these formats can be used as homework.
Yeah, and the links that we put in the presentation go straight to the
brilliant.
And if there are some teachers who would like examples of work that we've done using them, then we're more than willing to send that to them if they'd like it.
Brilliant.